one of the engineers that I worked with. I laid out all the risks and he was like, yes, I hear you, but I disagree. And I was like, all right, fine. You disagree and you want to do this and you have conviction, then, so will I. Okay.
Oh my God.
I will back you up. I think that type of conviction is the right type of conviction for any builder out there. And for any entrepreneur, really, you want to believe in your product so much that you're willing to stand up in court and argue for why it's better for the community.
Like Wolf of Wall Street, in a positive way. How much do you believe in this? All right, you believe in it? I'm your lawyer. I'll back you up.
Exactly.
But that was very inspiring.
All 100 of us. You've got friends here.
你知不知道？我不知道。Hey. Welcome to the IDK Show. My name is Jackie. I'm one of the co-hosts, along with Cindy and John. Well, first of all, Bu Zhi DAO is nonprofit, friendly, welcoming, and we are Taiwan-focused, apolitical, but also inclusive and open to all. And this podcast is called the IDK Show, with our goal is to help people learn about Web3, learn about each other's story, our journey into Web3. And today we have a very special guest. Her name is Jolie. Hi, Jolie.
Woo, hello.
Yeah, welcome to the show. We met in Taiwan. After Taiwan, we stayed in touch, hung out a ton in New York. And Jolie has always been someone that really inspires me because you've always been really, very driven. I remember you're in Big Law, Davis Polk, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And then you had all these ideas of maybe I want to go to Asia. I have this idea I want to do. So then to see you go to Coinbase, like, Jolie's in Web3 now. Really cool. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jackie. Excited to be here. This is my first podcast, so I'm excited to kind of figure out how this thing works. And I'm glad, I just want to say that you said Coinbase is Web3. Not everybody says that, so thank you for saying that. And I'm excited to talk more about it.
Do a lot of people think Coinbase is Web2?
Yeah. I think that's mainly the criticism that we get is that Coinbase is just an exchange, very Web 2, not very Web 3, not crypto forward. We've always aimed to be the trusted partner to other people who are entering into crypto for the first time, on board the next billion users, as we say, to Web 3.
What does Web 3 mean to you?
I don't know. It's a tough question. I think I've read so many articles, listened to so many podcasts trying to define Web3. And I think the consensus that people have latched onto is the one put forth by A16Z, which is Web3 you own. But I don't know if owning is really the way. I don't know if we're going in the right direction in terms of everybody owning their own identity, for example, or owning their own financial transactions, because at the end of the day, everything is so public on the public blockchain. How do you really control how that information will be used? Maybe we'll get there one day through DID or something like that, or DID meaning decentralized identity, for those that are not familiar with the acronym. But I think Web3 just means more democratic processes. There's more voices in the room to have a say in the products that are being built and having more power to walk away, for example, from a protocol that you may not like and you think is awful to another one. And I think that type of freedom is something that we don't get as much in Web 2 because the barrier to entry is so high for companies to build. And so I think Web 3 kind of even the playing field a little bit between those who are consumers and then those who are, creating the products.
Yeah, 100%. I really like what you said about walking away from the protocol that you don't like. It's kind of the idea of Web3 allows people to be platformless. You're not tied to the platform. Whatever you create, even your community that you build, it's not tied to any platform. You can take them away because everything's on chain. And I think that's super cool because right now, Web 2, the biggest problem is Facebook, Instagram has all your data and you can't just walk away, right? Because network effects, the cold start problem, all those things. So being truly platformless is super cool. What were you doing before Web3? You were at Big Law? And,
yes.
I remember you had a very intense experience.
Yeah, full of tears, some laughter, mostly tears. I was at New York. So I started my career in New York as a capital markets lawyer. Really just means I work on IPOs, stocks, bonds, any type of financing that faces the public, sometimes private financing as well. I remember at school, it's about learning 1934 and 1933 regulations. That's the Securities Act. I think a lot of people now know about it. But back then, people don't really care, right? What about 33, 34 regulations? It was because of crypto that it became challenged. Like, what does it really mean to be a security? And that's never been challenged in the last 20, 30 years. Like, people didn't care, so much. There's some edge cases, of course, of how do you define a security? But for the most part, people understand if you want to issue stock, you go through this process. You want to issue a bond, you go through this process. There's a very well thought out process. And it was in 2016 when I entered the workforce, people were like, what is Bitcoin? How do we regulate it? Is it under the SEC? Is it regulated by the CFTC? And so that's how I kind of got into it.
But when you talk about law and Web3, I get this excitement from you. It's not sexy work, right? Like as founders, I guess it's oh, you get to build a product and then you have to deal with the legal side of things. But I think in your perspective, what you shared before was legal should be building with product, alongside product, different paradigm that I hadn't heard before. Biggest lessons and mistakes you learned in Web3 thus far?
I think the mistake, I'll start with that one because that's a little bit easier, is
coming onto this podcast. I'm just kidding.
Absolutely. No, kidding. I always love talking to you, Jackie. Anytime. I think my biggest mistake as a lawyer is not understanding the tech enough would probably be my first mistake. It's very easy for lawyers sometimes to put a product in a box. Let's just for example, this is not my personal view, but let's just use this as an example. Uniswap, DEX, right? It is illegal to trade, to be a platform and facilitate trading of securities, unless you're a registered broker-dealer, blah, blah, blah. But Uniswap arguably, this is what they're arguing, is that it's just a smart contract. It's just transacting back and forth. There's nobody there facilitating anything. It's a program. Whether you're on the side of thinking DEXs should not exist or you're on the side that DEXs should exist, I think, both sides need to really understand the tech. If you don't do your due diligence beforehand, that doesn't look good and that doesn't look great if you're trying to argue this in front of a court. Talk to the engineers. Really just have them walk you through a smart contract. Have them walk you through where the funds are going, who's holding it, at what point does it, come to the consumer? What is the consumer seeing? And so I think all these are just really important lessons that I learned over time as a lawyer, and as a lawyer that came from big law or any law firm. The natural tendency is to see all the risks and just really mitigate them as much as possible and just raise the alarm almost on everything. But I think that really kills the vibe at the end of the day. And engineers don't appreciate it. I don't appreciate it. And I think it really does. And I think it's a skill. It's learning how to view risks and then put that into concrete, actionable steps for people like you, Jackie, to understand what are your choices to make. Because at the end of the day, you're the one making the decision. And how are you going to make the decision if everything I tell you is bad, 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 bad? What you want to know is okay, how bad is it compared to that bad? And is it really that bad? Those are just some of the questions that you probably wanted to understand. And that is, I think, what lawyers need to do when they're advising crypto projects.
Yeah, sometimes you just hear oh, no, that's a bad idea. Don't launch a token. Then you're like, okay, so I guess I'm done here. I just shut down my project. So we can expect you to audit our next smart contract.
No. I'm so relying on all the engineers to tell me what this line of code is.
They actually walk you through a smart contract and tell you what the code does and all that?
I think one of the coolest things I was able to do at my job was to walk through, they listed out all the smart contracts that they have and what each does. I didn't dig into the code with them because frankly, when I pulled up the technical design doc, I looked at it, I was like, no. Too much. But I hope to be proficient one day. I'm learning. I'm going through crypto zombies right now, trying to like figure out
No way.
how to code.
That's how I learned smart contracts.
Oh, awesome. Cool. Yeah, I have to pick your brain sometime because it's tough.
Really cool. Learning how to calibrate risk, learning how to communicate that, learning how to not kill the vibe.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so funny.
Okay, oftentimes I'm the one that people don't want to talk to, and knowing that, I cost money and I'm just going to make them change their launch plan or something like that. And I think that's why being a product lawyer is so important. So at Coinbase now, this year that I had the opportunity to really pivot into product legal work. And product legal is a very kind of niche field in some way that only exists in companies in-house, not at law firms. And it started off at Google. The reason why it came about was because back then people thought when you launch products, you get to build and then you go to your outside law firm and you ask them to sign off on certain things. Lawyers are actually coming in a little bit too late in spotting legal issues. In fact, the lawyers should come in earlier in the process and to help spot legal issues so that make the product successful, as well as lowering the legal liability of the company. And so especially in a field like crypto, where everything is so fraught with legal ambiguity and complex legal issues, I think it's more important than ever that legal is in the room. But I think it's a fine line to walk because you also don't want to be the one to stifle innovation. And I try to be very sensitive to the fact that when people are ideating, I let them throw any idea at the wall. And then I come in, when we have a more fully baked idea of like talking through what are the legal issues. Do we really feel strongly about this, this feature we want to have, and, try to figure out a way to, find a solution and to make sure that what we're building is compliant.
Yeah, from my experience, I definitely wish we had talked to legal sooner. Others, you just don't think about these things at all. It's like the last thing in your mind is like, this is past the Howey test. I'm like, yeah, the sooner you get that kind of information about what you're building, it helps you move faster before something's out there and people paid for it and whatnot.
Absolutely. I think that's why I feel very strongly about everybody who's a builder in this space to get smart on what legal regulations might apply. Because the more that you know, the better you can also filter through the noise. I think the best engineers that I've worked with are those that question me as well. Constructive, questioning, I think is very important. And as they get smart on it, they often ask me, and I'm surprised. They're like, "Oh, where did you see this SEC guidance that help you formulate this opinion?" And I was like, "Oh, well, here it is. If you want to read this, this long 10-point, 8-point font from the SEC, here you go." As you become smarter, it's also easier to build that intuition that I think takes years sometimes for lawyers to have. And I think engineers are super smart. And I've seen engineers pick it up very fast. And I think that is also a way to lower down costs as well, legal costs. Right now, it's a little bit too expensive. It's a little bit too expensive, the amount of money and time that you need to spend on legal and compliance just to be compliant, when I think that we need to balance the field a little bit. And this is mostly to regulators of how do you enable innovation without fear.
What do you think comes to mind when you're looking for that balance between proper regulations, but not over-regulating, giving people freedom, letting things be decentralized? How do you resolve that conflict?
That's $1 million question that I think everybody, including regulators, are trying to answer. What you regulate now may be bad for the future, but we don't even know what the future may look like. And I think that's the problem with crypto is we're still evolving. Who knew that NFTs 5 years ago would be the NFTs that they are today, or that DeFi just came into the scene super recently. Crypto changed so much, and I think there is a sentiment that we don't want to overregulate, or government doesn't want to overregulate and kill innovation, because we still don't know what the possibilities are, and I think there's some merit to that. But on the flip side, I think we're getting to the point where everybody is afraid, and it is hard. It's hard when the SEC gives the signal or doesn't say anything except that everything might be a security. And then what does that mean for the rest of us? Like, what if we created a governance token that we really wanted to use for governance purposes, but then now it's a security, and then are we going to get fined? Are we going to, there's a lot of open-ended questions I think we should get more clarity from, and I think it's time to get clarity from. Who regulates the industry on tokens? What kind of tokens are acceptable? What kind of tokens are not? Is there a workable framework for new entrepreneurs? Are there certain tokens that are more risky? Can we create a different framework so that people don't have to register what companies have to do for IPOs? Instead, there's a mini IPO that we can do, something like that. Big part of Web 2 for securities is disclosure requirements. For example, who's management? What type of responsibilities? What kind of material information do we need to disclose? And I think all of that need to be in Web3 too, but we need guidance as to what level of disclosure do we need.
It is a really tough question. A lot to learn, because as a builder, you just don't think about it. And when you do face it, holy, I know nothing about this. I have so much to learn, so much context, history. But someone sent me this article called You Get the Crypto Rules You Pay For. Have you heard of this?
I've not heard of this.
Usually they'll let things run, and then they'll pick something that stood out and then make an example out of it. And then going forward, that becomes the new regulation that everyone's like, oh, so that happened. So now that's the rule. They're not going to make regulation for you before you build it. You have to build it first, and then they will make the regulation, and then they will fine you. But the fine is worth it, because you are otherwise nowhere you can get to where you are, because they're not going to give you guidance, right? So it's almost the price you pay for innovating is at some point you get slapped a fine, and you're like, all right, now we know what's okay, what's not, and you kind of adjust. The whole industry adjusts based on that. Is that accurate? Or
I don't disagree. It's not the full picture, I think, in my opinion, but for sure, people help give clarity. So, for example, BlockFi, when the SEC fined them for their interest-bearing product, that gave a lot more clarity to the industry as to why they think it's a security. But there's also been instances where the regulators don't give any clarity. They just say, you're violating security laws, but we're not going to tell you why. And that's really hard to work with. There's a lot of people who argue that the SEC is now regulating by enforcement. Usually they focus on the big whales, the big companies that have the deep pockets to fight, but sometimes they don't. And it's tough. And there's also a constitutional argument as to whether regulation by enforcement is constitutional. There's a reason why, for example, when the SEC comes out with new interpretations and regulations in Web 2, they have a review and comment period and allow people to comment, allow people to get into compliance, and then put forth the regulation. And so I think right now it's just too selective, too ad hoc.
As a builder who might be listening to this podcast, what are some advice you would give them? I think you mentioned a few, right? Talk to a lawyer sooner than later. What are some things to consider when you try to determine where your risk tolerance is?
I think these type of questions are always a good time to test how much conviction you have about a product, because I definitely do not like people who chase tokens for the sake of tokens, launch tokens because it's token season. And I want to see tokens there for real use, real use for the product that you are building. Let's just use an example. I want to launch a token. Then, that tokens are likely securities. The SEC has pretty much said that in a lot of their ad hoc speeches, that is their informal view, or at least potentially their view, that a lot of tokens are securities, most of them, except for Bitcoin. Then I think the next step is let's engage a lawyer and get their formal opinion on what do they think about this project. And then they'll tell you what the risk is. Then I think the question comes down to, given all those risks, are you still a believer in what you are building? And if the answer is yes, then I think you found your bright line, right? Of where your risk tolerance.
What are some ways to sharpen your legal skills?
It's tough because crypto products are international in some ways. And so it's hard to think about what are all the different rules that you have to abide by. But, wherever you are, wherever you're planning to operate from, I think that is a jurisdiction that you want to kind of focus on. So things that I think are very important to read are, one, any news, any speeches, any announcements, press releases from your favorite regulators, whether that's the SEC, whether that's the CFTC, whether that's the Treasury Department. All of these people are very, what they say, you can kind of glean from their words where they might be going or what they're thinking. The other one are law firm just memos. Sometimes they put out for the public certain things about crypto regulations and their takes on it. And I think those are also valuable to read. Another one that I've started to really lean on and I enjoy reading is the one by A16Z. I think Miles Jennings does a really great job in putting out articles for builders to think through with respect to whether you want to create a DAO or not. And I think he put out a series of papers about which jurisdiction, how should you think about it, how did you think about tax. Papers that he writes are just gold. Those are things that, you would often pay thousands of dollars for a lawyer to tell you. And so I highly recommend those. And then finally, although I kind of caution people about this, is crypto Twitter. There's a lot of, I think, lawyers who are on crypto Twitter that try to distill some of the complex legal issues into actionable, steps to take as an entrepreneur. But I will say there's a lot of noise as well on crypto Twitter. So knowing who to follow can be tough. Read through the comments, trying to figure out who is more reputable, who isn't. I think lawyers generally should dox themselves. And so those who are doxed are usually ones that you can trust. If they're doxed, then they've thought through or they're willing to stand behind what they're saying. And I think those are the type of people you want to hear from, because otherwise people can say anything they want and then walk back from it.
Yeah, if someone's doxxed, then it means they have skin in the game, right? Their reputation is on the line. They're not going to say anything stupid. All the news, speeches, announcements from your favorite regulators based on your jurisdiction. Read the law firm memos on certain takes on crypto. A16Z, Miles Jennings, his papers on DAO, tax, all that stuff is golden. And then crypto Twitter is good, but just beware of who you're following, who's reputable. And the most easiest way is to see if they're doxxed. Someone like Jolie Yang, who...
Okay.
I just doxed you. Wait, are you you're doxed, right? So
yes. Yeah.
So saying your full name is okay?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Whew. I mean, we can always cut it out. No big deal. But if you follow someone like Jolie Yang, then she's put thought behind it. What is your overall thoughts on the industry? What are you excited, worried about? Do you have a strong conviction yourself? Being a lawyer that sees all the risks that possibly is out there, all the flags.
Well, I'm really excited for regulations to come. I'm going to say that. I think regulators need to put a stake in the ground somewhere. Once there's something, people will be able to build faster, be able to respond better, maybe to engage regulators with, whether it makes sense, whether it doesn't. And I think there's just a lot more fruitful. I think we're really at that stage. We're going to only get better if there's clear regulation. So I'm really excited about that.
That was the first time I ever heard anyone say that. Like, I'm excited about the regulators coming. I don't think I ever heard that. But it's awesome because most people... I know, which I love. It's such a different paradigm, right? It's a different perspective. At this point, just some guidance and find people is better than nothing, right? Just do it already. You said it can help us build faster when regulators come. So mind-blowing because it's almost counterintuitive. You would think regulators coming would stifle innovation, but you're saying the opposite, which I get, totally makes sense. Clarity is better than ambiguity.
Yeah. I mean, I will caveat it and say if it's bad regulations, though, it will stifle innovation. But I am putting my faith that people are going to be thoughtful. And if it's wrong, if it's bad, then hopefully they will be willing to change, and it will also rally the crypto industry, because I think there's a lot of key stakeholders that are a little bit fragmented at this moment. And so getting people to, think through some of the issues, I think are important, and we can collectively as an industry push back or to provide feedback on proposed regulations. Like, I don't want innovators like yourself or builders to really spend so much money and time thinking about law and spending that on really expensive law firms. And I just think like that's a really bad use of resources. And we should really figure out a way to allocate better, draw lines for people so that you know how to operate within a sensible framework. And so that's what I'm hoping for. Some of the other things I'm excited for are just the projects that are going to come out of this bear market. I don't know why. I can't say why exactly, but I'm bullish about NFTs. I spent way too much money on it. And I don't know. I don't think that was right. I don't think PFPs are necessarily the future. What I'm bullish on is the ability for NFTs to help create a fan base, loyal fan base, and knowing who they are for artists. And I think it's really amazing. You can build a following, you can attract new people to it, and you get to really reward people for being loyal fans. I think POAPs are cool. And then having a POAP, you get to really know who is it our true fans that attended this event that you want to, reward for the future. Because I see so many use cases and so many ways that artists have already done to help build their following. And I think we're only touching the surface.
It sounds like to me, is it accurate to say that you're more into utility NFTs, like membership, kind of like membership passes versus like, here's my insert X animal. What you mentioned that you're also bullish on is DID, so decentralized identity. Can you tell us more about that and why you're bullish?
I cannot wait for this to become a thing. I truly believe in order for Web3 to take off, everybody needs to have an identity tied to their name, tied to themselves in Web3, but still protect the person from the things that he or she may not want to share. I don't think we will ever avoid country lines, boundaries. For example, AML, OFAC, in case people don't know, AML is anti-money laundering. And OFAC is with respect to sanctions. So, for example, if you're on a sanctioned country list, there's restrictions on U.S. businesses to be able to do business with that particular country. And so these type of rules and regulations are country dependent, and I don't think they will ever go away. And if Web3 projects try to continue on this path of over-indexing on anonymity, I think it will just not take off. Eventually, regulators are not going to fly. If you're talking about money flying between borders, like there's no way. I think there's some type of identity that we will need to have. And I think being able to have that identity. So for example, I can have an identity of like, I'm an accredited investor. I live in the US. I have a credit score of something, right? It doesn't have to be the credit score of Web2, but maybe a Web3 version of credit score. I may have a reputation. All of this tied to your identity makes it so much easier for me to transact with other Web3 dApps. And so that I don't have to, create a new profile with a Web3 dApp. I don't need to worry about oversharing information. I get to protect the information that I don't want to share. And so I think that's why I'm very bullish on decentralized identity. I think without it, we can't really go to the next level.
Is this similar to the idea of zero knowledge proof? In case people aren't familiar, it's like the idea that like I can check if you meet a certain credit score without knowing your credit score. And it's kind of like that, right? For like regulators to have a zero knowledge proof, like, oh, I don't have to know it's Jolie, but I know you are a trusted investor and you have this credit score, and thus you're allowed to invest in this and do this and that. But that kind of exists already, right? So like kind of your ENS is your kind of pseudonymous identity, right? Is DID the same thing, or is it a level different?
Yes. So exactly. It is like ENS, but I'm hoping the way that I'm imagining, I think it's like what you just said about zero proof knowledge is just being able to verify people's identity without actually knowing. Because right now, I think ENS is very static. It's only tied to a wallet, for example, and you could also move it around. It's not really tied to an identity, and being able to bundle your different parts of like what you do in Web3 into an identity with a reputation or somehow for people to verify, I think we still have a long way to go.
I think you mentioned to me before that at Coinbase, you're doing some DAO related work. I'm not sure how much of that you're really allowed to share, but maybe if you want to share a little bit, whatever you're allowed to share about kind of the DAO stuff you're looking at.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting time at Coinbase because we are really going full in on Web3, making a strategic bet. I think that part of that is, our DAO protocol efforts. And the question is really like, why do you need a DAO? What are ways to form a DAO? And the issues, right, around it. How do you balance decentralization and governance, especially to, maximize efficiency and efficacy, but you also don't want to run afoul of, like the Howey test, for example, of like arguing for decentralization, of like this endeavor is not concentrated on a group of people. So those are just some of the questions I've been wrestling with.
I'm curious, what was your first impression of like Bu Zhi DAO when you kind of jumped into this rabbit hole?
Well, to be totally honest, I asked those questions. Does this need to be a DAO or is it more like a club? I was like, which one is it? And I think it's something that we're still trying to figure out, right? Like, how do we engage our members? How do we evolve? How do we execute on actions and things like that? And so I think it's something that if we're thinking about the most strict definitions of DAO, because in my mind, I've always thought DAOs are like those that are executed by smart contracts, most actions, and it's a lot of community like led. There might be a team that leads for a short period of time, but then that team steps off, and then like there's others that are in there. But for the most part, actions are executed via smart contracts. So I will say for BZD, I am very excited to see how it goes, because I think this is just a social experiment in many ways of like, number one, bring people who are Web3 together, which I think is amazing. Like, I really love the energy in BZD and the enthusiasm like of so many people. It's infectious, even though we're all over the world. And so I think that's super great. And then how we continue to evolve from here is something I'm excited to see, and hopefully guide us in the right direction, as in like maybe not the right direction, but not in the wrong direction. Like, let's just not go to jail.
Oh man, of all the things we can be going to jail for, I'm pretty sure BZD is on the low possibility. So, we're a nonprofit, how can we go?
It's true.
How can we possibly go to jail for this? Yeah, the vibes are so good.
The vibes are excellent. I really like them. I'm very impressed by the passion that people have in the group.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how when you have a shared mission and then you find people that you really like, just really high quality individuals, put them in a room, and then boom, the magic just starts happening. Of course, it's a lot of work to kind of, like you said, grow it in the right way, to not go to jail. I'm surprised, and it sounds like you are too, about like just how much energy and passion people have towards it. In your wildest imagination, what does BZ look like in a year?
As a lawyer, as a legal standpoint, that I think that I would love to see and hope is, and I think we can get there probably in a year, is just relationships with Taiwanese founders, Taiwanese like builders, Taiwanese government, and helping promote Web3 in Taiwan, and to help people, think of Taiwan as a friendly place to build and to, have a base there, or to do crypto related activities. I'm really bullish about infrastructure of Web3. I think there are some really cool things that people are doing, and they're really taking this time to think through what Web3 needs. And I'm excited that like bad projects are dying. This type of market calibration is well timed and absolutely needed. And I'm just really excited to see the projects are going to pull through during this time and where we will be after this winter. We'll say and put a plug in for the Taipei Blockchain Week that I am so excited that BZD is hosting it. And I am excited for the partnerships that will be announced. I'm excited for the speakers that will be announced as well. I think it's going to be a great event, and I'm just so impressed. There's still a long way to go till December, and I think it's just only going to get better. Like, if this is where we are now, December is going to be amazing.
what you said about like building that relationship with Taiwanese founders or international founders who are interested in the Web3 space in Taiwan, the ecosystem in Taiwan, and the government, making Taiwan like an innovation hub in many ways. So yeah, I think, when we had the conference at the end of the year and all these different parts come together, I think that would make a really, really solid foundation in the relationships that we talked about. People 知道 about 不知道. Which is our mission, right? Go from 不知道 to 知道. Amazing. What a night we had. Definitely a lot longer than I think both of us anticipated, but in really good ways, because I feel like there's just so much gold in this conversation. So how can people find you?
Please go to Twitter and type in Jolie Yang, spelled JOLIEYANG. That'll be my handle.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Hope you have a great evening.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the IDK Show. This episode is produced by me, Jackie, and edited by Thomas Lee. The intro and outro music is by Tmock. Check him out on Instagram, Tmock_FM. We're a nonprofit, fun, friendly, and welcoming DAO. A collective of founders, builders, investors, creators, and we'd love to welcome you to join us on our mission to bridge Web 2 and Web 3 and bridge Taiwan to the world. If you want to learn more about Bu Zhi DAO, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, buzhidao.tw. Come to our website, buzhidao.tw. We're also hosting Taipei Blockchain Week at the end of the year in December. If you're in Taiwan, come hang out with us. If you're not in Taiwan, this will be the perfect time to go back. And if you've never been to Taiwan, allow us to show you around our beautiful island. We'll see you on the other side, from Bu Zhi DAO to Zhi DAO.
All 100 of us. You've got friends here.
你知不知道？你在不在？
我不知道，我不知道，我不知道，我不知道。
Bye.